write it that many times. So 3, an exponent of 3 means you write it 3 times. So negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4 times negative 2. Positive 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. So we have a negative 8 minus, and then 5 squared is 25. Again, please remember that you should add the opposite. Negative 8 and negative 25 is negative 33. We're dividing that by negative 11, so that gives us a positive 3. Are there any questions over that one? And then on the next one, you were supposed to take all your profits and add them up, and your losses, which were negatives. So you've got your profits and your losses, which add up to what you get to keep. Were there any questions over 2 or 3? Anything? On the next one, remember that when you're asked to find the difference between two temperatures, that's always high minus low. So in this case, you would have done 85 minus 73. But in this case, you would have done 16 minus a negative 21, which when you add the opposite, that gives you 37. Are there any questions about the rest of the table? Please remember that you can ask questions. Are we good on the chart? Okay. So which state had the largest difference? Well, that would have been Arizona, because 112 minus 19 is 93. And then there's 6. So temperature on Wednesday, and then we say the temperature is equal to negative 14 minus 28, which gives us the negative 42. Any questions on that one? And then on number 7, we're borrowing $55 for our materials, and then they're selling the ribbons for $3 each, and they sell 50 of them. So 3 times 50 is 150 for your order of operations. You have to do multiplication first. And then from here, you do your addition. So negative 55 and positive 150 is 105. Sorry, 95. Any questions on that one? On this last one, or this next one, I would have drawn a picture. So at 3:14, we were at negative 14. And then it said she rose 2 feet per minute for 4 minutes. So she went up 8. All right, so then it went up 8 feet. So from there, this is 4 minutes time. So we started at 3:14 and we went up 4 minutes. So negative 14, during that time period, we went up 8, which puts us at negative 6. From there, we descended 6 feet per minute for 2 minutes. So we're going back down, and we're doing that for 2 minutes, so that's going down 12. And then that is the 2-minute time period. So we went from 3:18 to 3:20, and then we're going down 12 feet. Then she began to lose air, so she started rising 5 feet per minute, and we're going to do that until we hit the surface. So at 3:20, we were at 18. So after a minute, we're going up 5. After another minute, we're going up 5. After another minute, we're going up 5. And then our last minute, we're going up 5, but we've already hit the surface. We've already been above the surface for a few seconds. So at some point between these 2 times is when we hit the surface. And you didn't have to be exact on that. You just said between those 2 times. Does that make sense? Okay. So here's the work for the next one. Any questions on 9? Everybody's good on 9. And then remember with your models that minus 3 equals 4. And then I could have added 3 to both sides. And that would have given me n equals 7. You get the same answer. It's more steps, so there's more opportunity for you to make a mistake. I also did want to point out on number 12, several people made a mistake on this because we had 5.7 equals, and when we combine, we get 8. But we are we are subtracting 8 from both sides, which means we're dealing with integer rules and decimals at the same time. So you can't do 5.7 minus 8, so you have to think about that as far as your integer rules. You should be doing 8 minus 5.7 and then worrying about whether it's positive or negative at the end. So this is going to be 10, and that's 7. 10 minus 7 is 3. Carry down your decimal. 7 minus 5 is 2. Did I start out with more positives or more negatives? More negatives. So I'm going to make this an answer, a negative answer. Are there any questions on the equation stuff? Is everybody good on the equation stuff? Okay. On the next one, it was just basically asking you to list the steps. You could have listed these differently, but this is just the simplest way to get there. So first you should have combined like terms to give you your 10. Then you should have subtracted 10 from both sides, and then you should have divided both sides by 2 to get your solution of negative 1. Yep. The exam, you'll have griddles and multiple choice. So there's no like explain. You might have to explain through your multiple choice. Like there may be a description, and you've got to choose which one is the best explanation, but there won't be an actual writing portion. Anything on 16 or 17? What about 16? There. Okay, on 17, I had some people ask about that earlier. 12 party hats for 3 for 65 cents. So if you're buying 12 of them and they come in sets of 3, you have to divide that to figure out that you're buying 4 sets. So I multiplied 4 times 0.65. That gave me 260. But I also bought 49 noisemakers priced at 7 for $1.25. So 49 divided by 7, I bought 7 groups of noisemakers. So I multiplied that. And then somebody asked me last period, if I'm doing a tax, can I do it all together, or do I have to do it afterward, or individually? It actually doesn't matter. If you have 260 and you find 10% of that, that's going to be 26 cents. And if you have 875 and you find 10% of that, that's going to give you that amount. Those two amounts added together that's 13, that's 10, 11, and 1. It's going to give you $1.14. Notice it's that same amount as I would have gotten if I just took these values and added them together first and found 10% of that. Does that make sense? So it doesn't matter whether you do it individually or whether you do it all together. It's still going to come out with that same answer. On the next one, again, you had more negatives than you did positives. So you actually had to switch the order of that when you're subtracting. So you're doing 12 and 1/8 minus 8 and 2/5, which you have to find a common denominator, which is going to be 40. And your common denominator is 16. And then from there, of course, you have to borrow, which means you're adding 40 to this. So that's where your 11 and 45 over 40 came from, and 8 and 16 over 40. So when you subtract those two, you're going to get 29 over 40 and 3. But with that, remember that you did start out with more negatives than you did with positives, so your answer should be negative. So again, you're just taking what you already know about fraction operations and applying those integer rules. And then on 19, you want to make sure you follow order of operations. That gives you 3 over 8. And then you have to add the 1 to it, which is where you got the 1 3/8. turn it into a decimal, because we couldn't turn it into a percent. Any questions on that? Okay. Any questions on 21? So on number 22, I had some people ask about that. A lot of people told me that they chose answer choice C because this was exactly the same as that. But remember, it says between which pair. So if you have a number line, and this is 10 over 16, and this is 24 over 32, I want to know what number is between here. So all I did was I found common denominators because I realized that an 8 and a 16 could all be turned into a 32. So I turned this into a 32, which gives me times 4 times 4. So 20 over 32. And this was also 20 over 32. So this would be exactly on that, not in between. Does that make sense? So that's why A works. And then on 23, it was also one of those not type questions. It was just worded a little bit different. If we colored 1/3 of our picture blank, then that means 2/3 had, or sorry, 1/3 black, then that means 2/3 had to be white. Because 1/3 and 2/3 makes 3/3, which is the whole thing. Does that make sense? So from there, once I knew that it was 2/3, then I turned it into a percent. And either form was going to be okay on that. And I also had quite a few questions about the last one. So 20.4%. How do we turn percents into a fraction? What's that first step? You could, but there's actually an easier way. Straight to a fraction, what do we do? What if it was 30%? What is 30% as a fraction? 30 over 100, which is where we reduce or simplify and get our 3/10 from. So if we have 30 over 100, it's the same thing with that. If you put it over 100, that's a fraction. Is that its simplest form? No. From here, we would take this decimal and move it over once, which means we have to move that decimal over once, which is where this answer came from. This became 204, and that became 1,000. And then this one, if we did turn it into a decimal, as you suggested a minute ago, we would move the decimal place twice, which is the same thing as divided by 100, and you get this answer. So this is the only one that does not work. Questions on that? So what is the total distance? This was just a matter of converting them all into a convenient form and adding them up. Any questions on that? On 26, you're going to have a shelf. So on your shelf, you've got 2 boxes. And so what is the minimum distance that shelf could be? That's asked us to do is add them. So when we add them, keep in mind you have to have common denominators. So I made them into 20s. So times 4 and times 5. I added them together, which gave me 31 over 20. And so then 20 goes into 34 one time, which makes that 4. And there's 11 left over. And I don't care at that point if you put the decimal version or if you put the fraction version. Tomorrow you'll have multiple, or not tomorrow, whenever you take the test, you'll have multiple choice, so you'll be able to kind of tell which form it wants it in. So then the next one was asking you to subtract, a shelf length. Any questions on the next two? Remember that when you're multiplying fractions, like on number 26, And then we've got some questions to answer. So how many toppings are you able to order if you can spend at most $15? Well, it's going to cost $10 initially for the pizza, which gives me $5 left to spend on toppings. And the toppings are $1.50 each. Please remember that $1.50 and $1.50 is $3. So $1.50 now puts me at $4.50. Do I have enough for another topping? No. So I can only put 3 toppings on there, and I'll have 50 cents left over. It's a very similar process for number 31. And then number 32 asks you how would the equation change if the pizza was only $5? Well, this was the amount of the pizza before that $10, so now it would just change to a 5 instead. Any questions on that? And then remember, the other part of multiple representations is looking at graphs. You won't have to create a graph on your test, but you might have to look at and analyze graphs. Now, this was a little bit off, but the idea was supposed to be that they were dead even at 4. I know that the graph was a little funky on that. But if Company A and Company B are dead set at 4, then that means when is it cheaper to rent movies from Company A? Well, anywhere from 0 up to 3, because you're not going to rent 3.5 videos. So at 4, they're the same. So as long as you're renting 3 or less movies, you're okay. But if you're going to rent anything at 4 movies, it doesn't matter where you go. And then anything more than 4 movies is going to be cheaper at Company B. Does that make sense? And then let's go ahead and talk about this section, because I remember we had some trouble with this when we were learning it. Remember, when you're coming up with the rule, this part over here you guys tend to not have trouble with, but when you're coming up with the rule, you need to figure out what's happening here. Well, this is increasing by 5 every time. That number is what goes in front of the variable. And then to figure out if anything goes behind it, you're going to plug in 1. 5 times 1 is 5, and the list says that it should be 5. Is that true? Yes. So there's nothing behind that rule. However, when you look at the next one, this one's going down by 6 each time, which means in front of my variable I have a -6. So when I plug in 1, -6 times 1 is -6. But my chart says it should be 50. So how do I get from -6 to 50? I add 56, which is where this part came from. We're doing that. The good news is it's going to be multiple choice on your test. So you can always just plug in whatever equations I give you, expressions. You can just plug in 1, 2, 3, 4 until you find the one that works. Any questions up to 39? Okay. Determine the ratio that does not have the same value. So basically, we're just converting here. So we've got 2 out of 10, which is the same as 2 over 10, which is 20%. This one's 200, so it's going to be 2 out of 100, which is the same thing as 2%. So that one's not the same as these two. That one's already 20%. This one reduces down to 1/5, which is the same thing as 20%. So we're looking at this guy not being the same. And this one trips people up a little bit. It's talking about 2 different heights, 42.2 and then 42 1/3, which is 42.3 repeating, which means Fred saw the higher shot. And then it needed to figure out by how much. It's easier to deal with this in fraction form since this is a repeating decimal. So I did 4 1/3. And then remember that 42.2 is 42 2/10, which is the same as 1/5 over there. So that's how I subtracted. I turned it into a common denominators, and then I got that it was 2 over 15. Is anybody confused on those? Five-eighths over 6 periods, word bands or converse, identify the fractional amount. All you have to do is divide to turn this into a decimal. Or if you memorized it from your time quizzes, that's one of the ones you should know. Once you have it as a decimal, you just move it twice to get the percent. inside the rectangle, if you're determining the space inside of a rectangle, that's length times width, so you should be multiplying. And then remember that whenever you're multiplying or dividing fractions, you have to have them proper. So 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7, that's 7 over 2. 5 times 4 is 20, plus 1 is 21 over 4. 7 times 21 is 147. 2 times 4 is 8. And then you have to turn that back into a base number. And then the next one was asking about satin trim. Trim would go around it, which means we're looking for perimeter. So you can add up all the sides, or you can do the multiplication that you choose. Anybody need to see those words? Everybody's good. These are our last two. Now be very careful on these. What do you notice about 44 and 45? Yep. You do use the information from one to get the other, and that's important because what do you notice about labeling? What's different? One's yards and one's feet. So what are we going to have to do? We're going to have to do some conversion. So this is the first part that you're seeing here, is doing the conversion to figure out that money value. Are there any questions on these two? Does anybody need to see me work these out? Okay, please do notice that on this one, we are dividing fractions. Remember, with dividing fractions, just like multiplying, we have to have them proper. And once we have them proper, the first one stays the same. This changes to multiplication, and that one flips over. Is everybody good? Okay, so in addition to that, to your test review, that basically covers the majority of your first and second 6 weeks. Your third 6 weeks, remember all those strip diagrams, percent stuff, tax, tip, discount? That's more so what we concentrated on in the third 6 weeks, as well as our mean, median, mode that you just had a test over, all those graphs. That stuff is on there too. So definitely make sure that you cover these topics. Integers was in this review quite a bit, as well as rational numbers. There were some order of operations, equations, and sequences, and a little bit of multiple representations. But that graph stuff, not so much. So you need to make sure and go back and review the test that you took last Thursday that I handed back today. And then work them, rework them, and study it quite a bit. In addition to that, you still have some quizzes and things like that. You should have your packets that you can go back and look at. I did post a blank copy on my teacher web, as well as the key, so you can go back and print a blank copy and work over those problems again. And once you're done working those, then you have that key to check your answers. Are there any questions about what you should be studying